The discharge coordinator closed the door behind her and laid a blue folder across my knees, as if she were setting down something fragile. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "your family has requested that we postpone your release and begin evaluating permanent care options." For a moment I thought I had misunderstood her. I was 71 years old, 6 days out from a successful hip replacement, sitting upright in a rehabilitation center outside Columbus, Ohio, with my shoes tied, my suitcase packed, and a physical therapist's report saying I could walk 200 feet with a cane and climb the 4 steps leading into my own house. "What family?" I asked. She glanced at the folder instead of looking at me. "Your son-in-law, Brent Lawson. He says you've been confused since surgery and that returning home would be unsafe." I felt the room become very still. Brent was married to my only daughter, Rachel. He was not my doctor, not my legal representative, and not a man I had ever authorized to decide whether I could go home. "Did Rachel say this?" I asked. The coordinator hesitated just long enough to answer the question without speaking. "Mr. Lawson identified himself as the family member coordinating your care. He also said a room may already be available at Brookstone Memory Residence." That was the moment I understood this was not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding does not come with a reserved room. I looked past her at the packed clothes Rachel had brought me, the shaving kit on the windowsill, and the old brass house key resting beside my wallet. Brent believed 6 groggy hours after anesthesia had turned me into a man who could be moved wherever he found convenient. He believed the confusion I had experienced that first night was the beginning of my decline instead of a temporary reaction already documented in my chart. More than that, he believed I would accept what had been arranged, because resistance would make me look unreasonable. I asked the coordinator to show me the document, authorizing him to speak for me. She turned another page. "There isn't a court order. He told us your daughter holds your power of attorney, and that he was acting for her." "My daughter does hold a limited healthcare power of attorney," I said, "but it does not activate unless 2 physicians certify that I cannot make my own decisions. Has that happened?" Her face changed. "I don't believe so. Then I am capable of answering for myself." The words came out level, but I saw her shoulders tighten. She knew something had gone wrong. I told her I wanted the discharge delay placed in writing, along with the name of every person who had requested it and the medical reasons supporting it. Then I asked for my phone. She handed it to me without argument. I did not call Rachel. I loved my daughter. But love and urgency are not the same thing, and I had learned years earlier that when facts are being rearranged around you, the first person you call should be someone who understands records. I called Sylvia Grant, the elder law attorney who had prepared my documents after my wife died. Sylvia answered on the 3rd ring. I told her where I was, what Brent had claimed, and that Brookstone Memory Residence was apparently expecting me. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked one question. "Did you sign anything after surgery?" I told her I had signed routine treatment and insurance forms, but nothing authorizing Brent to make decisions. "Good," she said. "Do not argue with him. Do not let anyone move you. I'm bringing someone with me, and will be there before the family conference." I looked at the clock. The conference was scheduled for 3 o'clock. It was 12:40. "Sylvia," I said, "who are you bringing?" She answered, "The person Brent should have met before he decided you no longer owned your own future. My name is Walter Callahan, and before retirement I spent 38 years inspecting commercial buildings for the city of Columbus. I learned early that most structural failures do not begin with dramatic collapse. They begin with a hairline crack someone paints over, a support beam altered without a permit, a load added where no one calculated whether the floor could carry it. People notice the collapse because it is loud. Inspectors learn to notice the quiet decisions that make collapse possible. My wife, Evelyn, used to say I could not walk through a restaurant without looking at exit signs and ceiling joints. She was right. I looked for weaknesses because that was my work, but after she died, I became less careful about the small changes happening inside my own family. Evelyn passed 4 years earlier after a short fight with pancreatic cancer. She had been 50 years of sunlight in my life, the kind of woman who could tell you that you were wrong without ever making you feel small. We raised Rachel in a brick Cape Cod on Eastmore Boulevard, the same house where I still lived. Rachel was 44, a pediatric nurse, and the best thing Evelyn and I had ever made together. She was gentle, responsible, and so determined to keep peace that she sometimes confused silence with peacekeeping. Brent had married her 9 years earlier. He owned a home renovation company called Lawson Residential Group, though owned was becoming a generous word. His truck still carried the logo, his website still showed polished kitchens and smiling couples, and he still arrived at Sunday dinner wearing expensive boots that had never touched mud. But I had noticed jobs slowing down. I had also noticed Brent asking questions that did not belong to him. How much remained on my mortgage? None. Had Evelyn and I ever considered a reverse mortgage? No. Was the house too large for one man? Sometimes. But it was still my house. Did I know what homes in Eastmore were selling for? I did, because building inspectors notice property values even after retirement. Each question arrived wrapped in concern. Brent said he worried about the stairs, though my bedroom was downstairs. He worried about maintenance, though I hired a local handyman twice a year. He worried about loneliness, though I had coffee every Tuesday with 3 retired inspectors and volunteered Thursday mornings at a neighborhood food pantry. Concern was Brent's favorite tool, because concern made every intrusion sound responsible. Rachel would say, "He's only trying to help, Dad," and I would let the moment pass because I did not want my daughter caught between her husband and her father. Fathers know that particular temptation. We tell ourselves we are protecting our children from conflict, when sometimes we are only allowing the conflict to grow where they cannot see it. The surgery had given Brent an opening. I had put off replacing my right hip for nearly 2 years, but by spring the pain had become impossible to ignore. The operation itself went well, the first night did not. Anesthesia, pain medication, and dehydration left me disoriented. I asked where Evelyn was. I tried to get out of bed because I thought I had an inspection scheduled downtown. By morning, I remembered almost none of it. The hospital physician called it postoperative delirium, temporary and common in older patients. By the second day, I was myself again. I knew the date, the president, the name of the hospital, and exactly why I was there. Rachel visited every afternoon. Brent came twice. On his second visit, he stood near the window and asked whether I had considered something more supportive than living alone. I told him I had considered it and rejected it. He smiled and said, "We just want what's safest." There was that word again. We. Not Rachel and I. Not your family. A unit in which he had placed himself at the center and me at the edge. 2 days later, I transferred to the rehabilitation center for short-term therapy. Rachel was working 12-hour shifts that week, and Brent volunteered to handle communication with the facility. I agreed because I thought communication meant forwarding schedules and insurance updates. I did not realize he had begun describing my first post-operative night as evidence of continuing cognitive decline. He told a social worker I repeated myself, though he had asked the same question 3 different ways. He said I did not understand my medications, though the pharmacist had changed them twice in 48 hours. He said Rachel was overwhelmed and afraid to tell me I could no longer live independently. None of that came from Rachel. It came from a man who had started with questions about my house and had now found a path to separate me from it. The crack had been there for years. The reserved room at Brookstone was simply the first place the paint peeled away. At 1:15, the discharge coordinator returned with the rehabilitation director, a woman named Dr. Linda Price, who introduced herself carefully and sat across from me. "Mr. Callahan, I want to clarify that no one can permanently place you anywhere without your consent while you have decision-making capacity," she said. However, a family member raised safety concerns, and our staff delayed discharge until those concerns could be reviewed. "Did anyone ask me about them before delaying my discharge?" I said. Dr. Price looked at the coordinator. "It appears communication could have been handled better. That is not an answer." She took a breath. "No, you were not asked directly before the delay was entered." I handed her the therapy report from my bedside table. "This says I met the mobility goals for discharge." She nodded. "Physically, yes. My physician documented that the confusion resolved 5 days ago." Another nod. "Yes. Then what medical evidence supports a claim that I cannot make decisions?" This time, neither woman answered immediately. Dr. Price finally said, "The concern came from the family report." I told her, "The family report came from someone who had no authority to speak for me and whose account was disputed. I requested a formal cognitive capacity screening, before the 3 o'clock meeting. Dr. Price agreed. A nurse practitioner arrived 20 minutes later and asked me questions simple enough to be insulting but necessary enough that I answered every one. I named the year, month, location, reason for admission, medications, and the risks and benefits of returning home. I explained my therapy plan and the home modifications already arranged. I repeated 5 words after a delay, drew a clock, followed a 3-step instruction, and told her I would call emergency services if I fell. When she finished, she said, "Mr. Callahan, you demonstrate full understanding and consistent decision-making capacity." I asked her to put that exact sentence in the chart. At 2:10, Rachel called. Her voice was rushed and tired. "Dad, Brent says there's a meeting at 3. I'm leaving the hospital now. Did you ask him to arrange a permanent room for me?" Silence. Then she said, "What permanent room?" I closed my eyes. There are answers a father expects, and answers he fears. Her confusion told me Brent had moved beyond overstepping. He had used her name. "Rachel, come to the meeting," I said. "Do not call Brent first. Please trust me on that." She started asking questions, but I told her we would discuss everything in person. I did not want Brent warned. I wanted to hear how he described his actions when he believed his version of the facts was still standing. Sylvia arrived at 2:32 with a tall black woman in a navy suit named Camille Brooks. Camille introduced herself as an independent patient advocate who had spent 16 years working in hospital compliance before opening her own practice. Sylvia placed a leather folder on the table and asked the discharge coordinator for the written record of Brent's communications. The coordinator produced printed notes. We read them together. Brent had stated that Rachel was emotionally unable to confront me, that I had persistent memory impairment, and that the family was in agreement that I required supervised living. He had also asked whether the facility could provide documentation supporting the sale of my house to finance long-term care. That sentence removed the last possibility that he had simply panicked. He was already thinking about the house. Camille asked whether anyone had confirmed these claims with Rachel. The answer was no. Sylvia then opened my healthcare power of attorney. It named Rachel as my agent only upon written certification of incapacity by 2 physicians. There was no certification. It named Sylvia as an alternate. Brent's name appeared nowhere. Camille requested that every entry based solely on Brent's statements be flagged as unverified and that the discharge hold be reviewed immediately. Dr. Price agreed. Then Sylvia showed me something I had not expected. A real estate agent had emailed her that morning after receiving an inquiry about my property. Years earlier, as part of my estate planning, Sylvia had placed a notice with the county recorder requiring confirmation from her office before any transfer initiated under power of attorney. Brent had contacted an agent the previous week, asking what would be required to list my home if the owner entered long-term memory care. He had not signed anything, and he could not legally sell it, but he had begun preparing. "How did you get this?" I asked. Sylvia said, "The agent recognized the property protection notice when she checked the public record and called my office. She assumed the inquiry came from your authorized representative. It did not." At 2:55, we heard Brent's voice in the hallway. Sylvia closed the folder. Camille moved her chair to my left. Rachel had not arrived yet. Brent walked in, carrying a legal pad and wearing the confident expression of a man who expected everyone in the room to be waiting for his plan. He saw Sylvia first, then Camille, then the capacity assessment lying on the table in front of me. His step slowed. "Walter," he said, "I didn't know you had invited outside people." I looked at the empty chair across from me. "Sit down, Brent. We've been waiting for the person who decided I needed to disappear." He did not sit immediately. He looked toward Dr. Price as though expecting her to explain why the room had changed. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," he said. Camille replied, "That is what we are here to determine." Her voice was calm, professional, and free of the sympathy Brent had been using as cover. He finally took the chair. "Doctor," Price began by stating that my cognitive assessment showed full decision-making capacity and that my physical therapy goals supported discharge home with temporary assistance. Brent leaned forward. "A 10-minute screening doesn't erase what happened after surgery." He was asking for his wife. "She's been dead 4 years." I answered before anyone else could. "That happened during one night of post-operative delirium. It resolved by the next morning, and 3 clinicians documented it. Brent looked at me with a flash of irritation he quickly replaced with concern. Walter, nobody is trying to take anything from you. We're trying to protect you. Sylvia slid the printed communication notes toward him. You identified yourself as acting for Rachel. You represented that the family was in agreement. You contacted a residential facility and asked how Walter's house could be sold to fund placement. Rachel has not agreed to any of those things. Brent's face changed when she mentioned the house. It was not guilt at first. It was calculation. He was trying to determine how much we knew. The house is part of planning, he said. Someone has to think ahead. The owner thinks ahead, I said. The owner decides. He turned to me. You're 71, recovering from major surgery, living alone in a house with steps, and refusing to admit that things have changed. Things have changed, I said. My hip has been replaced. My ownership has not. The door opened behind him, and Rachel stepped into the room, still wearing navy scrubs under her winter coat. She looked from Brent to me, then to the documents on the table. What is happening? She asked. Brent stood. Rachel, I can explain. She held up one hand. I had seen my wife make the same gesture when Rachel was a child, and someone was about to make a bad situation worse by talking too quickly. Did you reserve a room at Brookstone for Dad? She asked. Brent said, I requested information. Did you tell them I agreed he should not go home? He looked at her. We talked about your concerns. I told you I was worried about him falling. I never said he was confused. I never said he needed memory care. Brent's voice hardened. Because you won't make difficult decisions. You avoid everything until I have to handle it. Rachel stared at him, as if a door had opened in a wall she had been living beside for years. Handle it? She said. You used my name. He started to deny it, but Camille read his statement from the facility notes. Daughter is in complete agreement but too emotionally distressed to participate directly. Rachel's face lost color. I never said that. Brent sat down again, but the authority had left him. Sylvia asked whether he had contacted a real estate agent about my house. He looked at me instead of answering. Business has been slow, he said finally. That sentence seemed unrelated until it was not. Rachel turned toward him. What does your business have to do with my father's house? Brent rubbed both hands over his face. For the first time since I had known him, he looked older than his years. I'm behind, he said. On payroll taxes, on 2 lines of credit, on the equipment loan. I thought if Walter moved somewhere safer, the house would eventually be sold. Rachel, you said the house would come to you someday. She recoiled as if he had touched her. Someday after my father dies. Not while he is alive. Not because you need money. I wasn't stealing it, Brent said. I was trying to create options. For yourself, I said. The room went quiet. Brent looked at me, and behind the anger I saw fear. It did not excuse him, but it explained the speed of what he had done. He was watching his business collapse, and instead of telling his wife the truth, he had started rearranging other people's lives to create an exit. I had inspected buildings where owners hid damaged supports behind fresh drywall because admitting the problem would stop construction and cost them money. Brent had done the same thing with his marriage. He had covered debt with confidence, fear with control, and desperation with concern for me. I need you to hear me, I said. Not as your wife's father. Not as an old man you believe requires management. As the owner of the house you tried to turn into your rescue plan. You had no authority to arrange my placement, speak for Rachel, or investigate selling my property. You used one confused night after surgery as permission to rewrite the rest of my life. That was not care. Brent said nothing. I asked the staff to correct this before I called Sylvia. I completed the assessment. I gave you every opportunity your own actions allowed. The discharge hold is being removed. I am going home tomorrow. You are no longer listed as an emergency contact, and you are not permitted to communicate with any medical provider on my behalf. He looked toward Rachel, but she had moved closer to my chair. Walter, I made a mistake, he said. No, I answered. You made a plan. The mistake was believing I would not discover it. Rachel closed her eyes. Fathers, you know the pain of watching your child realize that the person beside them has been living a second life. It does not matter how old your child is. Part of you still wants to pull them away from the fall. But Rachel was not a child, and I could not make the next decision for her, while demanding that everyone respect my right to make decisions for myself. She opened her eyes and said, "Brent, give me the keys to your truck and the house. You are not coming home with me tonight." He stared at her. "Rachel, I need to see every account, every debt, every document, and every message you sent about my father. Until then, you are staying somewhere else." Brent looked around the room as if someone might rescue him. No one did. He stood, removed 2 keys from his ring, and placed them in her palm. Then he walked out without another word. The door closed softly, which somehow made the moment heavier. Rachel sat in the chair he had left and began to cry. Not loudly. She covered her mouth and bent forward, ashamed of something she had not done. I reached across the table and took her wrist. "You did not know," I said. "I should have known." "Then know now." She looked at me. "Dad, are you angry with me?" I thought about the years I had stayed quiet whenever Brent crossed a small line, because I wanted to spare her discomfort. "I am angry that both of us mistook avoiding conflict for protecting each other," I said. "That ends today." I went home the following afternoon. Rachel drove me, and Camille met us at the house to confirm that the temporary support plan matched what the rehabilitation center had approved. A physical therapist would visit 3 times a week. A home health aide would come each morning for 10 days. My neighbor, Frank, had already installed a second handrail along the front steps and moved the loose rug from the hallway. I walked through my own front door using the brass key that had rested beside my wallet in the rehab room. That small turn of metal inside the lock felt more significant than it should have. But after someone has tried to plan your removal, entering your own home becomes a declaration. Rachel carried my suitcase upstairs, even though I told her not to. Then she stood in the kitchen where her mother had taught her to bake cornbread and said, "I'm sorry." I asked what she was apologizing for. "For telling you Brent was only trying to help. For not paying closer attention." I reminded her that I had also seen the pattern and chosen silence. We sat at the oak table. Evelyn and I bought in 1987, and I told Rachel every question Brent had asked about the mortgage, the property value, and the possibility of assisted living. She told me what I had not known. Brent had been moving money between accounts for almost a year, paying business expenses with credit cards, and hiding collection letters at his office. He had persuaded her to refinance their home 6 months earlier, saying the money would fund a profitable commercial project. The project had never started. By evening, she had scheduled an appointment with a forensic accountant and another with a marriage counselor, though she made no promise that counseling would save the marriage. "I need facts before I make a permanent decision," she said. I told her facts were a good place to begin. Sylvia came the next morning with revised documents. We removed Rachel's healthcare authority from automatic activation and replaced it with a structure requiring written confirmation from my physician, plus direct notification to both Rachel and Sylvia. Rachel remained my preferred agent because I trusted her, but no spouse, child, or other relative could act through her authority without written permission. Sylvia added protections preventing the listing, sale, refinancing, or transfer of my home during any temporary incapacity without independent legal review. We also created a visitor and communication directive for future hospitalizations. It did not say who could control access. It said no one could restrict access unless I requested it while capable, or my named agent did so under properly activated authority. Every important person received a copy. Rachel, Sylvia, my primary doctor, the hospital system, and the locked file in my study. I did not do this because I expected betrayal from everyone. I did it because love works better when authority is clear. Rachel later discovered that Brent had never reached the point of forging my signature or filing property documents. He had explored options, contacted an agent, and spoken to Brookstone, but the steps he took were enough. He admitted he had imagined the sale of my house solving his debt, though he insisted he planned to repay the money when business improved. That is the kind of promise people make after they have already decided another person's property is available for their use. Rachel required full financial disclosure. The numbers were worse than Brent had admitted. His company closed 2 months later. He sold his trucks and equipment to satisfy part of the debt. Rachel filed for legal separation, not because I demanded it, but because she said she could not rebuild trust while sharing accounts and a home with him. I never told her to divorce him. I never told her to forgive him. Those choices belonged to her. What I did tell her was that explanations do not erase consequences. Brent's fear was real. His debt was real. His belief that he was protecting Rachel from financial collapse may even have felt real to him. None of it gave him the right to trade my independence for his relief. 3 months later, I walked without the cane for the first time. It was a cold Saturday morning, bright enough that the frost on the backyard grass looked almost blue. Rachel came by with coffee, and we sat on the back steps beneath the awning I had inspected twice and repaired once. Brent had moved into a small apartment on the west side. He and Rachel were attending counseling separately, and she still had not decided whether their marriage could be repaired. He had written me a letter. It was 6 pages long, more explanation than apology at first, but by the final page he admitted the thing I needed him to understand. He had treated my temporary weakness as an opening. He asked whether he could speak with me. I agreed on 3 conditions. Rachel would be present, the conversation would happen in my house, and no one would use the word help to describe decisions made without my consent. When he came, he looked smaller without the polished boots and the confidence of a business owner. We sat at the kitchen table. He apologized without asking me to reassure him. That mattered. He said he had convinced himself that moving me into care would eventually benefit everyone, which was another way of saying he had built a moral explanation around a selfish need. I told him I understood desperation. I had seen men hide structural damage because they feared losing buildings, businesses, and reputations. The damage always gets more expensive when it is hidden, I said. Brent nodded. I did not forgive him that afternoon because he asked. Forgiveness, like authority, cannot be demanded on another person's schedule. I told him trust would depend on what he did after the apology, not on how carefully he delivered it. He accepted that. Rachel watched the entire conversation without stepping between us. That was new for all 3 of us. By spring, I was back at the food pantry on Thursdays. Frank and I planted tomatoes along the south fence because Evelyn had always insisted store-bought tomatoes tasted like damp paper. The first afternoon we worked, I found the blue folder from the Rehabilitation Center in a box of medical paperwork. Across the top was the original note, discharge postponed, pending family safety plan. I read it once, then placed it in the locked file with the revised documents. I kept it because records matter. Not because I wanted to live inside the injury, but because memory becomes unreliable when peace returns. People begin softening what happened. They say everyone meant well. They say families make mistakes. They say an old man was frightened after surgery, and a son-in-law became overprotective. The folder reminded me of the truth. Brent did not lose authority over my life because I embarrassed him, threatened him, or shouted louder. He lost authority because he never had it. My responsibility was to make the record reflect that fact. I am 71 years old. I have a repaired hip, a daughter who has learned that love sometimes requires confrontation, and a house that still belongs to the man living inside it. I spent 38 years inspecting foundations, and I can tell you this: a boundary does not become cruel because someone is disappointed by it. A locked door is not an act of hatred when the person outside tried to take the key. Care asks. Control assumes. Love listens. Fear makes plans in secret. The day Brent tried to decide where I would spend the rest of my life, he thought I was an old man waiting for my family to tell me what came next. I was not waiting. I was reaching for my phone,